Job, how Job has responded, trying to remind him. This must not be me. I know I'm righteous, and therefore the problem must be the way that God runs things. That life's not fair. God has wronged me, chapter 19 and verse 6. And so he talks about, I wish you would answer God. He talks about how life's unfair, and he talks about his own self righteousness, knowing in his own mind, thinking at least, that if there's a problem, it's not with me. I know I haven't done anything wrong, and so, things just must not be run right. Elihu answers these things. He says, first, in his first speech, or he gives kind of a prelude speech, but then he gives his first speech after the prelude that addresses this question, why won't you answer, God? And you remember what he says to Job? Does God talk to man in different ways? Yeah, nod your head this way. He does. He did, especially in the times of the patriarchs. And so Elihu reminded Job that God does speak by revelation sometimes, which would be an ordinary way of doing things in the age of the patriarchs. He teaches through various trials. That's basically what you're going through, Job. But the Hebrew writer says the same thing, that our fathers, just as our earthly fathers chastise us from time to time, God also does that with his people to help them become stronger and to help them learn things. All right, so God instructs and rebukes through difficulties. And then he also says sometimes God uses a wise messenger. Maybe that's what Elihu was, as a wise messenger to help Job get back on track. And in verses 29 and 30 of chapter 33, God uses all these things to bring a man's soul back from the pit. That's his first speech to Job. His second speech to Job is in response to, this just isn't fair. And he reminds Job that God will not act wickedly. There's not going to be an injustice with God. So whatever's going on, you need to understand that first and foremost, Job, that God's not going to do wickedly. And then he asks, can a mere man condemn somebody who is the supreme righteous person or the supreme righteous God? How can man accuse God? Be careful what you say, Job. God sees all, and he does not have any reason, he doesn't have any need to meet with man to be able to coordinate and collaborate and to know what's going on. God doesn't need that. And so he reminds Job of that as well. And then he reminds Job, or he basically asks Job the question in verses 31 through 33 of chapter 34, who is man to say when the lesson is over? And so God instructs in different ways. God knows when suffering should end and when it should not end. So who are you to tell God when the lesson's over? Who are you to tell God when suffering should end? And we talked a little bit, of course, about the teacher in a class. You don't walk in and then 20 minutes into class go, okay, teacher, the lesson's over. I'm leaving. That's not appropriate, is it? Our teachers wouldn't like that so much. And certainly God didn't like it that Job was trying to act like the lesson should be over. And then the third speech is with regard to self-righteousness. And he reminded Job that God doesn't react to sin as if he were harmed by it. And he doesn't react to righteousness as if that helps him any. God is not affected by how righteous we think we are, and he's not really affected by our sin. He may be saddened by it, but it doesn't discount his righteousness because we're unrighteous. All right. So we talked a little bit about the relationship that we have with God and what God wants in that relationship. And then in verses 9 through 14 of chapter 35, that men cry out. All right, so in times of trouble, men cry out, but he asks the question, who turns to God for comfort and teaching? And so some of the idea in this passage is that he is trying to remind Job that maybe Job, instead of calling out for relief, maybe it's okay to call out for relief in a difficult situation, but maybe it's better to call to God and say, teach me, instruct me in your ways. Help me to learn the lessons that I need to learn here. All right, so we looked at chapter 36 last week, but we didn't get to any questions in 36. So chapter 36, Elihu continues on and he speaks to Job, and he proclaims God's ways, God's righteousness, and God's greatness, God's majesty. And so in the lessons handouts, you'll see a few questions on chapter 36. What does Elihu presume to do beginning in chapter 36? Verses 2 and 3. Yeah, I'm going to speak on God's behalf. Now, did God need defending? Not really. But Elihu, I don't believe, is stepping across the line here. I really believe, based upon all the evidence, and we looked at some of this last week, when you see Elihu, he was never told to repent at the end. He may very well, and I believe he probably is, the wise messenger that God has put there for a reason. And so if God tells you to speak on his behalf, like he did the prophets and the apostles and others, then it's okay to speak on God's behalf if you've been given permission to do so. But doing so presumptuously, of course, is not right. That's the problem that some of the friends had. Okay, so Elihu is going to speak some words that I believe are going to help Job for the next round of speech that Job's going to have to face, because God himself is going to speak soon. All right, so what does Elihu proclaim concerning God? Verses 5 through 23. All right, so he doesn't despise anybody. He's not a respecter of person. He is going to do the right thing when it comes to holding those accountable who do things wrong. That doesn't always occur, though, on the timeline that we think it should. Isn't that part of the problem here? So he has to remind Job, God's going to do what's right. He's going to uphold the righteous. But Job needs to keep remembering this doesn't necessarily happen when Job thinks it ought to. All right, so God's eyes are on the righteous and the wicked, and he's going to render to each accordingly. All right, what does he then proclaim concerning God when you look at verses 24 into chapter 37? Really, we haven't read 37 yet. How does that help Job? How should it help Job? When we understand our place before God, does that help us? You know, I reference back to this from time to time. I'm going to do it again here. We're about to get into Luke 4, the latter part of Luke 4, and then into Luke 5 on Wednesday nights. And Peter, we see, came to know Jesus and he knew Jesus was very special, and yet until that event in Luke chapter 5, when he catches all the fish, maybe he didn't have a full recognition and realization of who Jesus really was, or a full appreciation of it. Because on that event with the fish, he can't pull in the fish. He realizes his boat's sinking. I can't do this, even with the help of my friends. When we gather our boats all together and we try to pull these nets in, there's too many fish, And then he all of a sudden stops looking at the fish and he looks at the Lord Jesus and he says, I can't do this. I am a sinful man and I need help. And now Jesus says, don't fear. Now you're ready. I'm going to teach you to be fishers of men. That's the state we've all got to come to before God. And Job needed that as well. He needed to understand that your place as you stand before God is somebody, no matter how righteous you believe you might be, you're insignificant, you're lacking. And looking to God helps you to get back on track, to understand that if whatever happens in life, that's my anchor, that's my hope, that's everything. All right, so it helps to be reminded of God's majesty. And when you consider God's greatness, somebody's going to be more likely to stay in his place. And as we mentioned several times here, Job has stepped out of his place a few times out of frustration, but he has decided that he wants to meet with God. He's decided that if God were to be willing to meet with him, he would have all the answers. He would fill his mouth with arguments that God would have no choice but to listen and to do what he's asking. And that's just not how God operates, is it? That he, like a genie, that upon our request, he just does anything that we demand. All right, so demandingness is a side lesson in the book of Job. We've got to be careful not to be too demanding on God. All right, chapter 37 and verse 14. What does Elihu counsel Job to do? All right, so a continuation of what he's been talking about. Yeah, this is a good verse that kind of highlights that section from the end of chapter 36 into chapter 37. Consider the wondrous works of God. All right, what are Elihu's closing words to Job in chapter 37 there, and how does that set stage for what God's going to say? And that's certainly going to tie in with some of the things God says about nature. And what do you know, Job? You think you know how things ought to be run. What do you know about the simplest of nature? And of course, Job doesn't. We're going to see that soon. Verse 23, as for the Almighty, we cannot find him. He is excellent in power, in judgment, and abundant justice. He does not oppress. All right, so these things Job need to be reminded of, that God's not going to do wrong. He's not absent-minded. He understands what goes on. He has power to save. He has power to do whatever he wills, and he's going to do what's right with it. He's not going to oppress. Therefore, men fear him. He shows no partiality to any who are wise at heart. This goes back to some of what Dylan was saying. That God is going to administer justice, and he's going to do the right thing. And he's not showing partiality. He's not going to take up a cause that's not appropriate. All right. There's Elihu's speech. What happens next? It is God's turn to speak. So there's an old saying, be careful what you wish for. Why? You might get it. Just might get it. Job gets what he wishes for. I want the opportunity to stand before God, Job has said more than once. And in chapter 23, like we just talked about, he has talked about how I'm going to be ready and I'm going to have a speech in mind. I'm going to be ready for God and I'm going to fill my mouth with arguments that God will have no choice but to listen to what I have to say. Right. Do you really think that's going to fly well when you're in the presence of God? Look how righteous I am. Look at all the things that I've done for the Lord and all of the great righteous acts that I've committed. You think that's going to impress God? You get to stand before God? How does God speak to Job when you get to chapter 38? How did God appear? Verse 1. Okay, now, I don't want to read too much into that, but nevertheless, what's a whirlwind? Okay, have you ever seen, I started to put a photo of a tornado. They look pretty menacing, but there's some photos of tornadoes that are real big, when they're real big in their diameter, and they're bearing down on a farmhouse or some other kind of structure, and they're right there. It is such an ominous look there. It's scary to think about being in the presence of that. It's a little less so if you see it way out yonder in the field. It's one of those little thin ones that are out there. When it's right on top of you and it's dark black and it's about to hit, and you can see it, with your, you can see the size of the farmhouse versus the size of this storm. It's scary. And you don't ever want to face that. Well, I don't know what the tornado was like, what the whirlwind was like that Job was facing here, but that's how I think that God is not particularly happy, and I know that because of what God says. All right, so what does he say here? Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Incidentally, Elihu had said that very thing to Job. All right, so when I say that I believe Elihu may be the messenger that helps prepare the way for what God is about to say, some of those reasons are not only that he's not told to repent, but the things that he has to say to Job are, God says the exact same thing to him in some cases. Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Job's been asking a lot of questions along the way, hasn't he? And he's been suggesting that it's not fair that the tents of robbers prosper. He after his speech in chapter 23, he goes on to talk about how the way it ought to be is that the righteous sees the ways of God. The righteous sees the punishment of the wicked. They live to see all of it, but that's not how it is. And he's frustrated by that because he thinks the ought of the situation is that this is how it ought to be, where the righteous sees the wicked get punished and the righteous be rewarded. And that's not always how it is, but that's how it ought to be. So God basically here is saying, okay, since you know how things ought to be run, I'm going to ask you some questions, Job. And since you know so much, let's hear it. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurement? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst forth and issued from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and the thick darkness its swaddling band? When I fixed my limit for it and set bars and doors? When I said, this far you may come, but no farther, and here your proud waves must stop? Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It takes on form like clay under a seal, and stands out like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the upraised arm is broken. Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, that you may know the paths to its home. Do you know it because you were born then, or because the number of your days is great? Have you entered the treasury of snow, or have you seen the treasury of hail? which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? By what way is light diffused, or the east wind scattered over the earth? Who has divided a channel for the overflowing water, or a path for the thunderbolt, to cause it to rain on a land where there is no one, a wilderness in which there is no man, to satisfy the desolate waste and cause to spring forth the growth of tender grass? Has the rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew, from whose womb comes the ice, and the frost of heaven, who gives it birth? The waters harden like stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen. Can you bind the clusters of the Pleiades, or loose the belt of the Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season, or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that an abundance of water may cover you? Can you send out lightnings, that they may go and say to you, Here we are? Who has put wisdom in the mind? Or who has given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can pour out the bottles of heaven? When the dust hardens in clumps and the clods cling together, can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lurk in their lairs to lie in wait? Who provides food for the raven when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? All right, there's chapter 38. What has God asked Job? Yes. So they have an idea of how everything works. And Job's been full of words up to this point. And again, we've said it throughout. Yes, Job is responding under duress. His friends have pushed him to this point. Still no excuse when you stand before God and you make bold declarations. Things aren't being run right. Oh, yeah, Job, tell me how things ought to be run. And so, question after question after question. Tell me about the clouds. Tell me about the rain. Tell me about the thunderbolt. How are you going to control that thunderbolt, Job? Are you going to be able to tell me when lightning is going to strike? We still don't know that today. Well, we think we know quite a bit, and maybe we know a little bit more over time, based on science than they used to. Although sometimes I wonder that too. You still don't know anything after all these years. We are not as smart as we think we are. Job was not as smart as he thought he was. Job was not as righteous as he thought he was. His friends, much more the case, were not as smart or righteous as they thought they were. And Job doesn't have a word to say. He can't answer any of this. He can't tell you about the ways of lions. Oh, yeah, he knows what a lion is. He knows he knows the rain comes. But he really can't explain it. You can't certainly predict how it's going to work or what the pattern is. What's the equation for when lightning is going to strike? We still don't know that, do we? What's holding back the? How does gravity work? Do we really know how gravity works? Do we know how the tides work exactly? Oh yeah, the moon affects it. Good, yeah, yay for us. We don't know anything. Job, you don't know the simplest of things, and yet you're going to tell the commander of the universe what he's doing wrong? That's what Elihu has tried to explain to Job and remind Job. Be careful, Job. You're not arguing with a man when you approach God. All right, let's read on. Chapter 39. Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young, they deliver their offspring. Their young ones are healthy, they grow strong with grain. They depart and do not return to them. Who set the wild donkey free? Who loosed the bonds of the onager, a type of wild donkey? whose home I have made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwelling. He scorns the tumult of the city. He does not heed the shouts of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searches after every green thing. Will the wild ox be willing to serve you? Will he bed by your manger? Can you bind the wild ox in the furrow with ropes, or will he plow the valleys behind you? Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave your labor to him? Will you trust him to bring home your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are her wings and pinions like the kindly stork's? For she leaves her egg on the ground and warms them in the dust. She forgets that a foot may crush them, or that a wild beast may break them. She treats her young harshly as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain, without concern, because God deprived her of wisdom and did not endow her with understanding. When she lifts herself on high, she scorns the horse and its rider. Have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He gallops into the clash of arms. He mocks at fear and is not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the glittering spear and javelin. He devours the distance with fierceness and rage, nor does he come to a halt because the trumpet has sounded. At the blast of the trumpet, he says, Aha! He smells the battle from afar, the thunder of captains and shouting. Does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make its nest on high? On the rock it dwells and resides, on the crag of the rock and the stronghold. From there it spies out the prey. Its eyes observe from afar. Its young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there it is. All right, so the speech continues. This section of the speech, what's God focusing on? Kind of the same things, but he hones in on what's he honing in on? His design, and in this case, mostly with the animals of nature. He's talking about the lions at the end of chapter 38, rather. He's talking about other aspects of nature, but now he's talking about things that Job has seen horses, right? He's seen wild donkeys. He's seen hawks and their behavior. Surely he knows something about those things. He could probably attest to some of the things that God has said, and yet he knows nothing, even about the things he knows about. You don't understand. Why is it that the horse is very regal-like in his approach to a battle? He's not scared. He doesn't. Did anybody see the movie Secretariat? Yeah, they quote some of this in Job, the movie Secretariat. Thunders away and he's snorting. He's full of pride as he marches or as he gallops toward the battle. No fear. Explain that, Job. How does that work? And we're about to see Job's answer. I don't know. Chapter 40. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it. Answer me, Job. You want to contend with the Almighty? You want a meeting? Here's your meeting. So, what are the answers? And what does Job say? Verse 3 through 5. Okay. I don't know. I don't know. Lord, I don't know. Behold, I'm vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I've spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. Has Job learned his lesson yet? Okay. He knows to put on the brakes, doesn't he? I'm not going to charge before God acting like I know everything. But what does God say back to Job? Verse 6 and verse 7. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. I'm not done with you yet, Job. You're not going to be able to wiggle out of this by just saying, I don't know, I'm so bad. I know I'm bad and vile. All right, yeah, you've learned to hit the brakes. Now you need to learn to be impressed by God. Truly, truly blown away by the presence of God. Not done with you. I got more questions, Job. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God? Or can you thunder with a voice like his? Then adorn yourself with majesty and splendor, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him. If you think you can be like God, that you know the answer to everything, then fix yourself. Come out of this problem that you're having and array yourself in glory and splendor, Job. If you know so much, do it. Look on every one, verse 12, who is proud, and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together. Bind their faces in hidden darkness. Then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. When you're able to operate and do things and know things like God, then God says, yeah, then that'll be the time when you'll be able to save yourself. That ain't how it is, Job. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. In all this, have you noticed God did not respond to Job by saying, Job, you got it all wrong. You don't know what's been going on here. See, behind the scenes, Satan issued a challenge. And I'm the one who's been defending you the whole time, Job. You just don't see it. Did God do that? Did he need to do that? Why not? And he didn't know Job an explanation about what was going on, did he? Again, that's part of the lesson Job needed to understand, is that God's not going to do wrong. He's going to always be upright, and he's going to administer justice, but it's going to be his way and in his time. All right, we'll talk about Behemoth in a few minutes, but let's talk about Leviathan first. Let's keep reading. I've been doing all the reading here. Somebody want to read chapter 41, verses 1 through 11?
Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle, never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine.
All right, somebody want to pick up 12 through, I don't know, 20. This whole section really talks about Leviathan, so 12 through 24 maybe.
Yeah, Chris.
I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, or his graceful proportions. Who can remove his outer coat? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? With his terrible teeth all around. His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning brushes. His breath kindles cold, and a flame goes out from his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They are firm on him, cannot be moved. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as the lower millstone.
When he raises himself up, the might, because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. Darts are regarded as straw. He laughs at the threat of javelins. His undersides are like sharp potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. On earth there is nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is king over all the children of pride. I've asked you as a special project to look up whatever you can about Leviathan and Behemoth. Behemoth in chapter 40, Leviathan here in chapter 41. In the old days, and I won't tell you what the old days mean, but sometime in the past, people thought that Behemoth, that's an elephant or maybe a hippopotamus. And there are certain aspects of it that maybe some people like that. But elephants and hippopotamuses don't have tails like fingers. Leviathan comes along. And Leviathan is a great creature, no doubt. In times past, a lot of people have thought, okay, he's talking about a crocodile, something like that. Well, maybe again, to some degree, it is a prehistoric type crocodile that's on a scale that we've never seen. In the days of Dungeons and Dragons, you can look up Leviathan now off the internet, and you'll see, you see some clues here, that this is a great creature of the sea. Okay, and you'll see in other passages in the Bible that it's apparent that this is a sea creature primarily. But you'll see some monstrous, I don't know, you looked it up. I did once, not recently, but a while back, and there's this little boat here. And the boats have nothing compared to the Bible. All right, so there's this little boat, men on it. All right, and here's this giant creature. That's how they draw it. Okay, that is more the Bible description of what's going on. So is this some kind of a sea dragon? Might only talk with a mythical beast or whatever. If you've got a situation like that and you're in that boat, what are you going to do? You're going to die. Okay, let's just face it. You're going to die. His scales are tightly knit so that you can't even get a spear in between them. He has armor that you can't clash with this creature. He's got teeth. And he asked in the early part of chapter 41, okay, try to put your hand on him. What's going to happen? Are you going to do it again, Jack? Try it once, you'll never do it again. Here, little kitty. What's the point that God is bringing out here? Would Job ever try to tackle Leviathan? It would be out of your mind to try to grab that creature and tame him and say, you're going to do what I said. I'm going to quarrel with you and I'm going to win. But what's the point? You tried to wrestle with the creator of Leviathan. You can grab Leviathan and truck with his neck and toss him like he's nothing. That's what you tried to do, Job. You have no expectation of being able to overcome Behemoth or Leviathan, and yet you've tried to overcome the creator of those two. Let's pick up there next time, and we'll talk about that special assignment, about what these creatures might be, and then we'll get into chapter 42. All right, thanks for your help.